What is going on, everyone? Welcome to the Slaw Sports Show. As I promised, we'll be having a midweek episode this week. So here it is. Today, we're going to be talking about the top 5 teams in the NFL that I believe are ready to take the next step forward in terms of their team success going into this season. So it could be teams getting to the playoffs, or it could be teams just getting a couple more wins this season that I'm expecting to see versus what we saw from last season. So it's just my top 5 teams with a couple of honorable mentions thrown in that I think will be taking a leap forward going into the 2021-2022 NFL season. So let's go ahead and get right to the video. All right, so like I said, let's go ahead and get started with our top 5 teams that I think will be taking a leap forward or taking a step forward in the right direction this year in the NFL. So I got a couple of honorable mentions to throw in here before I get to my top 5. But again, this isn't teams I think will be contenders. This isn't teams I think will make the playoffs this year. This is just 5 teams I think in their respective path of their franchise, I think will take the next step forward toward their team's, franchise success going forward for years to come. So I'll explain it more for each team as I get into it. Obviously, it'll make a lot more sense once I get into the teams and begin talking about them. But let's, like I said, start off with my honorable mentions. So I have 3 honorable mentions to discuss today. I have the Arizona Cardinals, the Minnesota Vikings, and the LA Rams. 3 very diverse, different teams right there that are in different parts of their franchise success and their building success for their franchise in terms of the future and what they want to do as a team going forward, just into this season. Not really looking too far ahead, but going into this season, what's their next step forward as a franchise? And are they primed to take that next step forward as a franchise this season? So the Arizona Cardinals, this one is an interesting team that I really want to look forward to watching this year. It's a high explosive offense, a lot of fun to watch. The defense, I think, will be flying around as well, led by Buda Baker, who's in his nature a guy who flies around in the secondary, loves to be in the action. But the offense, they have a lot of, explosive offense, pass catchers now and playmakers on the offensive side of the ball, and added a new one in the draft in Rondale Moore, added a new one in free agency in AJ Green. Still a big question mark on Larry Fitzgerald and whether or not he's going to come back. When I made this video, still hasn't come back. So waiting to see if Larry Fitzgerald's going to come back and be with the Arizona Cardinals for yet another run. But this year, with what the Cardinals have offensively around Kyler Murray and around Cliff Kingsbury's offense, I think this will be the first year Cliff Kingsbury offense really takes the step he wants it to take. And that's why I put him in here as an honorable mention to take that next step as a franchise. Because first and foremost, they got to get this offense figured out, get their identity figured out, and get what Cliff Kingsbury wants to do rolling in the right direction. So to do so, he might run 4 or 5 wide at wide receiver. They have the talent to do so, especially if they bring back Larry Fitzgerald, especially 4 wide. I can definitely see, DeAndre Hopkins, AJ Green, Rondale Moore, and then you add in possibly Christian Kirk or Larry Fitzgerald in that 4 spot. So really a lot of options just in the passing game to go around for the Arizona Cardinals. And then still looking to add, I would think, hopefully a new tight end. They lost Dan Arnold in free agency. Hopefully they add in someone in via trade, maybe a Zach Ertz by trade from the Philadelphia Eagles that they still could be interested in as training camp comes forward in the next couple of weeks. But in the running game, that one's interesting too. In the running game, of course, you got Chase Edmonds, who's now finally lifted up to that number 1 leader role in the running back room. But they also added in James Conner in the offseason from the Pittsburgh Steelers. He's going to take some carries away, not only potentially from Chase Edmonds, but also from Kyler Murray in that offense as well. Kyler Murray, as we all know, can be a dual threat explosive quarterback as well, and really likes to use his legs and in the running game and be a difference maker on that side of the ball as well. But still has that rocket arm to make these different targets work in the passing game. So offensively, I think this will be a fun team to watch. Defensively, they've very much improved. Very much improved so on the defensive side of the ball. What they were able to add in the draft and Zaven Collins in the first round, He's already dealt with some legal issues, but if he ends up taking the field and gets all that squared away, he's a great person going forward for this team and for this franchise in that back end, in the middle of their defense. And of course, in free agency, added J.J. Watt, three-time Defensive Player of the Year award winner. This guy's explosives I'll get out and really can be that difference maker for that defense with Chandler Jones filling in that Hassan Reddick role. Those two are going to be as explosive as a duo. I think will be in the NFL this year together. If J.J. Watt has a full, healthy, productive season, that's exciting to watch in itself. And the other thing with that defense that I've heard from training camp and heard from mini camps is Zaven Collins. So as I talked about, their first round pick out of Tulsa at linebacker traditionally has been, kind of that middle linebacker role. That's kind of been the sideline to sideline guy. But from what I've heard is they've been, testing him around with J.J. Watt off the edge and being more of a pass rusher. I think that's because of Isaiah Simmons, who they drafted last year in the first round out of Clemson. He's that guy that I think potentially could be their middle linebacker that they still have a lot of faith in. Despite a 16-game season last year, only had 54 tackles and 2 sacks. I think the productivity will come this year for Isaiah Simmons, and they'll really start to put things together for him and help him figure out their defensive scheme going forward and just overall more concisely round out that unit. Secondary is a little bit of concerns outside of their safeties, but specifically at corner, they did lose Patrick Peterson. Didn't really bring much in on that back end defensively, really to help out at corner. They did bring in Malcolm Butler. I don't know if he's really that much of an upgrade over a Patrick Peterson who left. So now let's get to our second honorable mention team, the Minnesota Vikings. Same thing defensively. I think we'll get a lot more improved this year around in terms of what they did last year. Minnesota in the offseason added Dalvin Tomlinson at defensive tackle, who's a huge run stuffer and also a guy that can get after the passer as a defensive tackle. And really all around is going to help build up that defensive unit that's always been impressive under head coach Mike Zimmer. So they're going to add into that unit with Dalvin Tomlinson. Defensively, they've improved just on their own end, getting back Eric Kendricks and Anthony Barr together. Both guys have spent time with injury, getting them back on the same page, meshing together in that middle of that defense. And they're the leaders of that defense. And that's been their bread and butter the last couple of years. So Anthony Barr coming back off IR is going to be huge for the Minnesota Vikings this year. And in terms of what they want to do defensively. And of course, they still got that secondary intact. The big upgrade was Patrick Peterson, who I just talked about leaving the Cardinals. He's going to promote a significant upgrade over Jeff Gladney, who was their number one corner as a rookie last year, who started 16 games, really took a brunt of the work against number one receivers. Now you get back in Patrick Peterson in that number one role and is really going to help that defense all together improve. And the offensive line also improved slightly as well. Getting in what they got in the draft was a huge help on the offensive line, especially their first round pick, Christian Slaw. He's the highest graded Power 5 pass blocker in the entire draft, had a 94.5 pass blocking grade, which in the Power 5, like I said, is the best at power blocking, which is what they're going to run, pass blocking. They're going to want to be possibly a lot more pass heavy next year. I know Dalvin Cook is a huge help in that offense and really their main focal point. But with what we saw last year from Justin Jefferson in his first year in this offense, almost taking home Offensive Rookie of the Year honors until that was taken from him late by Justin Herbert. But still a great year nonetheless for Justin Jefferson. Went over 1,400 yards, an NFL record by a rookie, 7 touchdowns. That guy was a phenom and a beast. Giving him another season with Adam Thielen is going to be huge in that offense. The real question mark, and I talked about it on my show with Matt Lagusa a couple weeks ago, there's going to be a huge spotlight on Kirk Cousins and Mike Zimmer this year. Mike Zimmer, because his defense is fully back and healthy and they've added pieces to that unit. But Kirk Cousins, because we all know from the Panthers Confidential, Minnesota's willing to trade up to the number 8 overall pick to select Justin Fields. Ultimately didn't have enough capital to do so. and ended up settling with Kellen Mond in the second round, I believe. And he is now on board with the Vikings. Actually, third round, Kellen Mond. But he's now on board with the Vikings to potentially take over from Kirk Cousins in the near future. So huge spotlight on him to perform this year with the cast that they have together in Minnesota. And lastly, I got the LA Rams. The LA Rams, I think I didn't put them on my list because I think they're a team that could be a little overrated this year, and we might be not blowing them out of proportion, but just they really don't have that much forward to go. Last year they were there. They were there in what was it, the second round against the Packers, and just came up short against the Green Bay Packers, and we're a game away. One win away against the Packers, they would have been in the NFC Championship game, battling for a spot to the Super Bowl. And we all know the improvements that they've added to their team. Matthew Stafford, the huge one coming in at quarterback. Sean McVay isn't going to let that game down. So I think, just real short and sweet to the point with the LA Rams. They're there. They basically just have to do it. There's no taking a step forward. They're already there at the top as a contending team in the NFL this year. They really just have to put the pieces together that puts them over the top this year, and just win the game. That's all they have to do at this point is win the game. There's no steps to be taken other than win. So that's what we're looking to see from the LA Rams going in to this season. So let's get to our top five. Top five teams that I think are ready to take their next step as a franchise going forward into the 2021-2022 NFL season. And what I'm going to do is talk about basically what I've just briefly been doing with my honorable mentions. Talk about really in depth their additions to their team this year that they didn't have last year. Talk about some of their rankings last year, offensive rankings, defensive rankings, that kind of thing. Talk about a few notes from minicamp that has wrapped up and we're approaching training camp. Talk about what I've heard, what I've seen, and what's been rumbling with these five teams. And then finally give my player to watch out for each team. Watch out for this guy going into the 2021-2022 NFL season, because I think that guy is going to be the one that puts them the next step higher in terms of their franchise success. So let's go ahead and get into it. At number 5, we have the Carolina Panthers. My homegrown team, the Panthers, playing in Charlotte, North Carolina right now. The Carolina Panthers last year did not have a great season at all. With Teddy Bridgewater, really, shot the gun on the season last year. Had a lot of very close games that they should have won, but came up short time and time again. Red zone offense was horrible. 2-minute offense was horrible, which is some growing pains with a college offensive coordinator coming into the league that you should expect that will hopefully get fixed this time around going into this year. But when you look at the Carolina Panthers last year, finished 5-11, missed the playoffs, ended up being third, second worst, third in the NFC South, right above the Atlanta Falcons. So the Carolina Panthers, I think that they're going to take a step up this year in terms of their franchise success for the main reason because their defense is ready to explode. I think this is the year the Carolina Panthers defense comes back and is dominant again. For the first time since they lost Luke Kuechly, I think the Panthers have all the talent on defense now to really explode. I think they have more more talent, on their defense than their offense. I really do. And I really think that this defense, if they put it together this year, could be a top 5 defense in the entire NFL. And I'm telling the truth. I'm not just saying that to say that. I think this defense can be a top 5 defense in the entire National Football League going into this season. Last year, their defense ranked 18th in scoring, 17th in pass rush, 18th in total defense, 18th in passing, and 20th against the run. Really right in the middle. Actually in that, back end of the middle group right there in terms of the NFL last season. And I think there's going to be much improvement from this unit. Let's go ahead and get into it and tell you why. So the additions to the Carolina Panthers, what they brought in the draft and what they brought in free agency. let's pinpoint each of these guys and talk about their success and how I think they'll mold with this team going forward. So first and foremost, since we're starting with the defense, let's start with Hassan Reddick, who's an edge rusher coming over from the Arizona Cardinals, who I talked about earlier. Hassan Reddick coming in, an outside linebacker. That what they're going to do really is put Hassan Reddick opposite of Brian Burns. Brian Burns, who had a great year last year and really came on the scene with 9 sacks and 3 forced fumbles last year. This year, I think he's going to get even better because of Hassan Reddick alongside him on the other side of that defensive line. Hassan Reddick's going to take a lot of pressure off of Brian Burns and allow Brian Burns to really just be a manhandling monster off the edge next year that Carolina hasn't seen since Julius Peppers. I really think he has that type of potential in this defense this year in terms of Brian Burns' success going forward. And Hassan Reddick is going to be a huge part of that on the back end. An interesting stat to throw at you right now. In terms of last year's 2020 stats, the Carolina Panthers have the number 1 pass rushing duo in terms of sacks. Brian Burns and Hassan Reddick combined for the most sacks by a duo entering into this season out of every team in the entire National Football League. Now you're putting them together. They weren't together last year with their production. I want to see what they do together now on the same team and on the same defense. And also on the defense, what really hurt them last year, like I talked about with these grades, passing defense ranked at 18th in the NFL. I think that's going to be improved as well. Obviously, from what they did in the draft, in the first round, took J.C. Horn, who could be one of the best corners in the entire draft. It's right there. 1A and 1B really was Patrick Surtain and J.C. Horn. And J.C. Horn went first above Surtain, and maybe Carolina saw a reason for that. I'm excited to see what J.C. Horn does alongside Dante Jackson. And keep in mind, they also added in A.J. Boye, a guy who has playoff and Super Bowl history on his side and experience on his side to help these young guys. Help Dante Jackson, who's going into his 3rd year now, and help J.C. Horn going into his rookie year this year. Round out that secondary. The Panthers are also moving Jeremy Chin back to safety, who they drafted last year. He kind of played that safety, linebacker, corner, hybrid role, whatever you want to call it. Finished with 117 tackles and 2 touchdowns. We all know both touchdowns coming in that same game. But really, think back to last year's NFL draft. The Carolina Panthers drafted all defensive players all the way down the board. They're now entering into year 2, and all these guys now have room to improve. Yetur Gross-Matos, who now might be coming off the bench because of Hassan Reddick. He still was productive enough last year, 6 quarterback hits and 2.5 sacks in his limited role. If he keeps that up, keeps that same production up in an even more limited role this year, Troy Pride at corner, put him in the slot potentially. All these guys really have room to improve on that defensive unit. I'm really excited to see what they can do. And also Denzel Perryman. He's a huge upgrade over Tahir Whitehead at middle linebacker alongside Shaq Thompson, who I think will also give more opportunity for this team to explode on defensively going into next season. So you probably guessed it. My player to watch is Brian Burns. Brian Burns has potential to be up there in the race for Defensive Player of the Year. Well, will he win it? Most likely not, but he will be in the running for that race, and he will have double-digit sacks this year. I'm calling it now, alongside Hassan Reddick on this Panthers defense. So now let's look at their offense, and I talked about last year how horrible they were in red zone and 2-minute drill situations. That's going to come with age and hopefully get much improved this year with their offensive coordinator, getting things squared away, getting things back under control on that side of the ball and in those situations. And that's just something you can't really, prepare for going into the NFL from the college ranks. You just have to experience it firsthand. And now you're going into year 2 with this system, and hopefully it'll be much improved this time around. But offensively, I think they'll be much improved because of what they're bringing in. Just like I talked about on defense, same way on offense. They still have DJ Moore and Robbie Anderson, who were a great duo last year. Yes, they do have Christian McCaffrey coming back at running back, ready for a full, healthy season as the lead back again for the Carolina Panthers. But they're bringing in Sam Darnold, who I have a whole video on if you want to go check that out. When that trade happened, they're bringing in Sam Darnold at quarterback. They've got their guy now at quarterback. They brought in David Moore at wide receiver, who we all thought immediately would be the number 3 guy behind Robbie Anderson and DJ Moore. But I think the number 3 guy now is going to be Terrace Marshall. Terrace Marshall out of LSU that they drafted. I think he's going to be a huge help to that red zone offense. This is a guy who was a dominant, huge red zone threat for the LSU Tigers last year and the year before, back in 2019 when they had Joe Burrow. And this guy really, in his career, had 23 touchdowns and just all in all is a physical freak. 6'3", 200 pounds, and ran just as fast, nearly as fast as fellow LSU wide receiver Jamar Chase did in their pro day leading up to this year's NFL draft. Terrace Marshall is going to be a red zone beast for the Carolina Panthers, and I think will quickly move up to that number 3 role. I'm excited to see him come into play together. Bringing all of his stuff together, helping that red zone offense out, and ultimately boosting that offense to the next level right off the bat in his rookie year. I'm excited to see him play. But like I said, Christian McCaffrey, of course, is going to be a huge addition back to this offense. Back, healthy, ready to go. CMC is back, baby. Excited to see him. Robbie Anderson, Sam Darnold reunion. Another thing I've written down to help this offense grow. It's already there. It's already built. It's already the connections are there. So Robbie Anderson can keep being that, intermediate to deep threat guy for the Panthers this year. Back with his old quarterback he was with the New York Jets. Still a little bit of a concern at left tackle they need to address. That's the main thing that reporters have been asking Matt Rule about all minicamp long is what's going to happen at left tackle. Is our left tackle already in the house? Are we looking to add other people? Who's going to eventually start? Panthers still have to answer those questions as they go into training camp until they finally figure out who their guy's going to be. That's a critical position on the offensive line to not know who it is at this point in the offseason. Still a concern of mine with the Carolina Panthers going into this season. But nevertheless, watch out for Brian Burns. Let's get to number 4. So number 4, I have the New York Jets. And you're probably asking, why is the New York Jets, a team who had 2 wins last year, why do I have them on this list? Well, like I said, this list is primarily teams ready to take their next step forward as their franchise. They're not going to be a playoff team, nowhere near a contending team, but the Jets are going to take a step forward as a franchise this year from what they did last year in a huge way. I don't think it's going to be, pen and paper, the numbers look better for the New York Jets this year. I still think they could be, a 5-6 win team this year, which that alone is a 3 to 4 jump in terms of win total from what they had last year. But I just think at the end of the day, the Jets roster much improved, but the big thing, the culture improved for the New York Jets, and that's what you build your team around is your culture. And that started when the Jets hired Rob Saleh from the San Francisco 49ers to be their new head coach and bring that culture. Joe Douglas nailed it out of the park with that hire. Probably my second favorite hire, and I'll get into my first one in a few minutes. My second favorite hire was Rob Saleh in this year's coaching cycle. He's going to bring all the energy, all the passion, all the emotion to the culture of the New York Jets and build it back from the ground up. They didn't even have the foundation anymore to build from. They're building this thing from the ground up. And I think in the year 1 with this new regime, this new offense, this new talent, this new team, they're going to take a step forward in year 1. So the Jets, we all know, second pick in the NFL draft, drafted Zach Wilson out of BYU to be their new quarterback, who is now, Broadway Zach, I think they call him. So he's going to be their quarterback. Was a great pickup by them. Joe Douglas, their general manager, was fascinated by Zach Wilson all along and for great reasons, and he's now the guy. With the trade of Sam Darnold, really it became official that he's going to be the guy, but we all knew all along the quarterback was going to be the guy, whichever one they drafted. and ended up being Zach Wilson, who I think was going to work out perfectly with the New York Jets. And then they traded up again into the first round to take Elijah Vera Tucker on the offensive line, a guy who's a multi-positional player on the offensive line who will most likely line up at guard right next to Mekhi Becton to really beef up one side of the offensive line, to really just power that side of the line. It's the same thing that they do in San Francisco with what they did with their offensive line, that power run, outside run that they always do. They're bringing that same offense with Michael LaFleur over to the Jets. So logically, they get that guy on the inside of the offensive line to pair with their big guy, Mekhi Becton, who they drafted last year out of Louisville, to power that side of the line over and over again. So they got two big guys capable of handling the load on that side of the line. And then in the second round, to start it off, they took Elijah Moore out of Ole Miss. And I'm really enticed with Elijah Moore this year, a guy who finished second in college football in terms of yards, right behind Devonta Smith, the Heisman winner from last year. Right behind him was Elijah Moore with Ole Miss. So they're adding him to that wide receiver room that's pretty young as of right now. They brought back, figured out their situation with Jamison Crowder. He's back. But now we look at the additions they've added. Last year, they drafted Denzel Mims in the second round. This year, they drafted Elijah Moore in the second round. They also added in Corey Davis in the offseason and Keelan Cole in the offseason as well. It's a lot of wide receivers, but a lot of number 2 wide receivers. My main concern is who's going to be the wide receiver 1. Who's going to be that guy for this offense this year, and the one that really the focal point goes to. It could be Jamison Crowder. He had that role last year. They brought him back. It could be Corey Davis if they move him out wide. Don't really know if he's going to be able to handle that. We never really saw that in Tennessee really work out too well. Those were the years he really struggled, were the 2 years he was asked to be that guy for the Tennessee Titans. But I think it's going to be Elijah Moore. I think he's going to grow into that role as their number 1 guy as the season moves along. So he's my guy to watch out for, is Elijah Moore. Looking at the draft and going back and reading up what I had on these wide receivers, I was really impressed with Elijah Moore. I had him listed as a dynamic slot option who is explosive, elusive, and has quick speed, and is a great route runner. But I also said he could fit. He has lots of fits and options in terms of potential teams. But I really think potentially, given his size and length, which I said could be an issue, I think he could show early on the season that they could use him out wide on the perimeter, on the sidelines, out wide at wide receiver, on the edge. I think Elijah Moore can end up being that guy when he ends up proving himself after a couple of games in the slot and take over as that number 1 wide receiver. And the other thing is their defense. Another thing that I'm kind of slightly concerned about. Up front, they're great. Their front 7 is built defensively, and I like what they're doing up there, especially Quinnen Williams off the edge, or on their offense, or defensive line. Really love Quinnen Williams, the guy they drafted last year, had a great season as well. I believe, 2 years ago, Quinnen Williams. Love what he did last year and the year before, but he's coming back for another year. Excited to see him progress on this defense, especially with Robert Saleh, who most likely I think will be calling the defense as their head coach. But their back end, their secondaries got a little bit of concern. They were able to bring back Marcus May on that franchise tag, and I believe gave him an extension as well, which was great for their defense. On the back end in the secondary to get him back, I think was huge at safety. But then they added in Carl Lawson, LaMarcus Joyner, Vinny Curry, and Sheldon Rankins on that defense, all of which guys will, in their own right, make additions to this defense that will improve them in the long run. And as we talked about on Friday, going back to last week on our weekly live stream on Fridays, they added Morgan Moses as well on that offensive line. So Joe Douglas has done a fantastic job of building this team from nothing, building it up already before we even see what this unit can do once they take the field come week 1 against the Carolina Panthers, which is a great game, by the way, against their former quarterback in Sam Darnold. But really, the only thing I'm worried about with the New York Jets is the fact they have a defensive-minded head coach in Robert Saleh and a great play caller in Mike LaFleur. What's going to be their focus? What is this team going to be when we look at them on the field? Are they going to rely on their offense? Or are they going to rely on their defense? I really want to know how this team's focus is going to be going in to this season and what's going to be their goal and their focus as a team. So number 3 on the list of teams I think will take a step forward this year in this NFL's upcoming season are the Dallas Cowboys coming in at number 3. I think as a franchise will take the next step forward. And this is an obvious one. Dak Prescott is coming back. The first 5 games with Dak Prescott last year, the Cowboys were exciting, explosive, and were scoring points. But defensively, they were giving up a lot as well. But offensively, this was an exciting team. Fantasy owners were drooling the first 4 weeks of the season about the Dallas Cowboys, all the way up until that game where Dak Prescott broke his ankle and was out for the rest of the season. And really, the season just tanked from there for the Dallas Cowboys from then on out. And Dak Prescott's coming back this year, fully healthy, new contract. He's locked in as a Dallas Cowboy for years to come. So I think that 6-10 record from 2020 is going up. And me and Matt Lagusa debated who's going to win the NFC East when we did our divisional rankings a couple weeks back. And it was between the Washington football team and the Dallas Cowboys to win that division. And we went with the edge to give Washington the win in the division. We had the Cowboys right there behind them. So the Cowboys are coming back this year, ready to go with Dak Prescott and ready to really just take off running from where they started from last year. Not where they ended from, but where they started the first 4 games of the season with Dak Prescott. Defense, I think, still needs some improvement. That's some things we've still seen from minicamp as well that happened and transpired last year, continuing into this year is their defense. That still needs to improve. They added Micah Parsons in the first round at linebacker, but I don't think he's enough. I still think there's too many holes in that defense all around that roster, especially in terms of depth, that when they start, losing some guys, that's going to be critical. Experience in the secondary is a huge issue for the Dallas Cowboys. You got last year they drafted Trevon Diggs, who's still going to be their number 1 corner. And I guess number 2 corner is going to be Kelvin Joseph, who they drafted this year, I believe out of Kentucky. Not that great. Not a great start for the Dallas Cowboys in terms of their secondary. If they have to rely on a second-year player and a rookie to lead their defense, that's going to be a tough task to ask from these young guys in their division and in that conference going forward. But the offense, I think, will be just fine. Last year with Dak Prescott, I've been talking about, they were phenomenal offensively. But the huge issue they did have offensively was Ezekiel Elliott. Ezekiel Elliott took a huge step backward last year, had fumbles after fumbles, could not hold on to the ball. And it looked like going into this season, Tony Pollard might be the guy that finally takes the reins from Ezekiel Elliott. But all of the rumblings that I personally heard from Cowboys training camp is stating that Ezekiel Elliott is slimming down. He's looking more elusive again, and everyone is raving about how much better he looks this year than last year. So hold the brakes on Tony Pollard taking over. It looks like Ezekiel Elliott's still there and will still handle the bell cow work for the Dallas Cowboys. And I said defense is an issue. I think the real issue is their coaching staff. That's what happened last year with the Dallas Cowboys that derailed their season. Not just Dak Prescott getting hurt, because it looked like for a while Andy Dalton was starting to bring them back in the NFC Beast, as we all know that was a horrible division last year. The Cowboys started coming back into that thing after that slow, dip they had and that speed bump they hit when Dak got hurt those next couple of games. All of a sudden, Andy Dalton started bringing them back up and potentially leading them back, we thought, toward the playoffs and winning the NFC East. But ultimately, it derailed with the coaching staff. The veteran players and the coaching staff did not get along from the middle to end of the season, with Mike McCarthy bringing in his own staff, all new guys. The veteran players were clashing with Mike McCarthy's staff, behind closed doors, in the locker rooms, after games, after practices. That can't happen. That cannot happen in the National Football League if you want to be a successful franchise. So either Big Mike McCarthy needs to stop being, a buffoon and stop with all his baloney talk about analytics this and analytics that we all know Mike McCarthy has not been, focusing on. And we saw that last year when it was proven last year that no, he did not spend those years where he was fired from the Green Bay Packers studying analytics in his basement because he did not use the analytics at all last year with the Dallas Cowboys. And his coaching staff did not make things better, clashing with the veteran players on, their defense especially. That's got to be fixed this time around, Dallas. You got to get that right, get that figured out with your coaching staff and your team. If you have any hope of taking that next step, starts from the top up. Top down is what the NFL starts from. Look at the most successful NFL franchises, top down. So my player to watch for the Dallas Cowboys this year is going to be Amari Cooper. And reason why, there's a lot of hype. So much hype on CeeDee Lamb going into year 2 back with Dak Prescott. And CeeDee Lamb last year, look at his stats and what he did. 935 yards and 5 touchdowns. He had 1 rushing touchdown as well and 74 receptions. And everyone's hyping CeeDee Lamb up to being the guy for the Dallas Cowboys this year. Let's not forget, Amari Cooper was on pace to being the wide receiver 2 in fantasy alone. Those first 4 games, if he continued that pace with Dak Prescott, he would have finished right behind Devontae Adams in terms of fantasy output last season. And really, this year, he might be even better. Amari Cooper is prime for a great year this year with Dak Prescott and could end up being the wide receiver guy this year in terms of what he did last year. Looking at his first 5 games, which, the 5th game, I believe, is the one where Dak Prescott got injured. Amari Cooper had 39 receptions in those 5 games, 55 targets in those first 5 games. It's 11 targets per game, evenly. He had 424 yards, nearly, what is that? 84, almost 85 reception yards per game. And receptions per average, 10.9. Like I said, 11 receptions almost per game. And then had that 1 touchdown as well to start. But that target share, the yards per game, the receptions per game is really what stands out to me with Amari Cooper. And if that comes back next year, he can turn that into success. The yards per game and the receptions per game will be there with Dak Prescott with those same amount of target share in that offense because they didn't add much offensively to their team in the offseason. So still have Michael Gallup, still have CeeDee Lamb, still got Blake Jarwin, but I still think that target share is mainly going to be going to Amari Cooper. And he starts turning that into yards after the catch, starts turning those into extra yards, and starts turning those into touchdowns. He will have a great season this year back with Dak Prescott. So he's my player to watch. Watch out for Amari Cooper this year with the return of Dak Prescott. So here coming in on the tail end, we got number 2 on our list of teams ready to take the next step forward in this year's NFL season. And we got, you guessed it, the Washington football team. I've been on them all off season long. I love what they've done. I talked about the Dallas Cowboys, how me and Matt Laguza projected they'd finish right behind Washington in the NFC East. I think Washington takes that next step up. I don't think they win the NFC East again. I think they could win a playoff game this year with the talent they have. And really, their entire offseason was filled with filling each and every remaining hole they had on their entire roster. And now they are a complete and utterly complete team offensively and defensively. And I don't think they're talked about enough. This team really is, they're there. Playoff experience last year with some of their younger guys, especially with Chase Young on defense. He got a chance to go, toe-to-toe with Tom Brady in the playoffs. They got experience winning their division. And they, faced their fair share of rough patches, faced their fair share of great patches, greener grasses last year, to really make them more experienced all in all of what they can encounter this year, which I think all pairs together nicely for them to take that step, win a playoff game, is that next step for the Washington football team. So I said they filled their off season. Their off season was filled with remaining holes that they had to fill. So what were those, additions? What did they bring in to help fill these holes? Let's start with Ryan Fitzpatrick at quarterback. Last year at quarterback, what they experienced with Kyle Allen, experienced with Taylor Heineke, and then ultimately, had some runs with Dwayne Haskins early on, and then decided whenever he was healthy to go with Alex Smith, who ended up leading them to the playoffs. We all know Taylor Heineke played that wild card game, and losing there at the end to Tom Brady and the Buccaneers, who of course went on to win the Super Bowl. Remember, and Washington was that close with them in that game. But now you really got consistency and security at quarterback with Ryan Fitzpatrick, a guy who's aging like fine wine. He's getting better year after year, no matter his age. And just like Tom Brady, the older he gets, the better he's getting. So Ryan Fitzpatrick, I said it before, this is now his best cast I think he's ever had. Even that year with the New York Jets when they went to the playoffs, where they had, Wes Welker, Eric Decker, and those guys. I think this year his cast is even better in terms of his entire roster, his coaching staff. I think everything's a lot better, and this is the best situation Ryan Fitzpatrick has ever been in. There's no doubt and no surprise he looks as happy as he does in training camp. During mini camp. Training camp still coming in a couple of weeks. There's no surprise in that. Ryan Fitzpatrick is a much happier guy this time around and this year with the Washington football team. And also on offense, we all know Terry McLaurin at wide receiver. Antonio Gibson going into year 2 as the lead running back. But also at wide receiver, they're now adding Curtis Samuel, who's back with Ron Rivera, and that offensive scheme he ran in Carolina. Really, he was great. 2019 had a great year. 2018 had an even better year with the Carolina Panthers. And that same offense they're running now in Washington. Curtis Samuel's going back there, being that guy who could be, he, like I said with Elijah Moore, size and length doesn't make it look like he's going to play outside. But Curtis Samuel might be that guy. He might be that number 2 outside guy behind Terry McLaurin. I could see that happening. And the target share is going to be there for Curtis Samuel, which I think might be one of his best seasons this year if he has the target share with Ryan Fitzpatrick. They also added Adam Humphries, who I think might be the slot guy to take over in the slot if they move Curtis Samuel outside. I think Humphries, he's been in that role, the slant guy, the guy that's really, the move the sticks type of slot guy that an offense really needs. That's what he was in Tennessee. That's what he will be this year in Washington. And then the draft late, they added Dyami Brown out of UNC. He's a guy who I don't think will have immediate success with this team. But as the year goes on and we get closer to the end of the season and into the playoffs for Washington, Dyami Brown's a guy who's going to get a lot more snaps as the year progresses. But early on, we're not going to see very much of him this season, I think. But in the future, Dyami Brown will get a lot more workload going forward. So that's their offense. And of course, I already talked about him briefly, but also Antonio Gibson at running back. I love my boy Gibby at running back. Last year, finally started getting things going as the season went along toward the end of the season. He finished with 795 yards, almost 800 yards, and 11 touchdowns, and almost 250 yards receiving as well. Had a great year last year in his rookie year, and excited to see him come back in year 2. So that covers their offense. Their offense, which was 25th in scoring, 30th in total offense, 25th in passing, 26th in rushing. I just told you why they're going to improve. All of these reasons, this team's going to improve offensively, which is really their issues last year, was that that offense. Defensively, Washington was great. They were one of the best defensive teams in the entire NFL last year. They were 4th in scoring defense. They had the 2nd total defense, 2nd passing defense, and the 5th best pass rushing defense, all led by Chase Young with 12 quarterback hits and 7.5 sacks, on way to a Defensive Rookie of the Year award. Now you got Chase Young going into year 2 with a lot of guys that they've added to that defense that will very much help them improve. And they're also, like I talked about with some other teams on this list, they're getting some help back from injury. They're going to bring back Landon Collins, who's back from his Achilles. Landon Collins at safety coming back from his Achilles injury. He's going to come back at safety as well with his defense. They added Will Jackson from the Cincinnati Bengals in the offseason at corner, filling in with what they've lost at corner. Looking back at Washington, losing Ronald Darby, now they're adding in Will Jackson. So that's going to be great and a great addition going forward with that defense. Will Jackson, I think, is very much an experienced veteran who a lot of people have underrated in the past, who I think this year will have a good year with Washington. And then you look at the draft. I talked about Dyami Brown that he took out of UNC toward the later part of that draft. But in the first round, they were able to take Jamin Davis out of Kentucky, who I think was a great addition to this team going forward. I really like Jamin Davis. He's a guy who exploded onto the scene late in terms of draft talk and rose into that first round. A guy who was expected to be a 7th-round pick all of a sudden was a locked first-round pick and went, in the top half of the draft to the Washington football team. Right there in that middle pack of the draft to the Washington football team. He's going to fill in that hole at, the middle, that middle section, the second tier of their defense at that linebacking group. Jamin Davis, that guy who's going to fill that hole they had defensively, really the only hole they had defensively on that back end. So I'm excited to see Jamin Davis as well. Some questions I still have with the safety groups. Of course, who's going to lead them? I talked about Landon Collins coming back from his Achilles injury, but they also added in Bobby McCain from the Miami Dolphins. And you got to think back to last year. Cameron Curl, the 7th-round pick, was phenomenal. He had a great rookie season despite being a 7th-round pick. You look back at his stats as well. A guy who put up 4 pass deflections, 3 interceptions, 88 tackles, 5 quarterback hits. Cameron Curl is everywhere. Listed as a cornerback, but they really played him as that box safety type of role. So now that's the role that Landon Collins played. So it's going to be interesting to see as training camp plays out and we start getting a better look at these rosters, who's going to lead that safety group for the Washington football team. And really, that's the one real question I have. And the other kind of issue that Washington has right now is up front on their offensive line. They did bring back Brandon Sheriff, but they also just lost Morgan Moses and moved on from him. And also in the offseason, they added Eric Flowers. But I think there's a lot of competition. I think there is going to be a lot of competition and a lot of position battles up front in terms of who's going to end up being the starters for this Washington football team offensive line. You got a competition at right tackle between Samuel Cosme, who they drafted out of Texas, and Cornelius Lucas. Who's going to win that battle between Cosme and Lucas? An experienced guy versus a rookie. Who's going to end up coming up on top in that training camp battle? That's definitely going to be one to watch here in the coming weeks. And then, of course, they got Wes Schwartz and Eric Flowers, who I just talked about. They're battling right now for that left guard position. So 2 battles that they've got to get figured out in training camp and determine who their starter is going to be going forward. But even though there's a battle, there's greener grass on the other side if there's a battle. Because positional battles in training camp are great. Because that means the better man is going to win and be the starter. But you also have a great man that who's willing to fight on depth in the as a second stringer. A guy who can come in if an injury occurs during the season, which for playoff teams happens at some point, especially on the offensive line. Look at the Kansas City Chiefs last year late in the playoffs. Look at the Green Bay Packers last year late in the playoffs. Injuries up front happens, especially in the deep playoff runs. And if we think Washington is going to take that step toward a deep playoff run this year, they're going to need, looking at this positional battle up front means that they're going to have some great depth behind their starters when they choose to do so. So I'm excited for the Washington football team. My player to watch is, of course, going to be Logan Thomas. Their tight end who last year, pulling it up real quick, last year with Washington had 670 yards and 6 touchdowns, really came on his own as being a guy who, showed out that he is the tight end of this offense. And this year, We all know what Ryan Fitzpatrick was with his tight ends last year. Was really happy. Actually, last 2 years with Mike Gesicki in Miami. Logan Thomas this year has a chance of being a top 5 tight end with this offense, with some uh, the right amount of target share going his way. If this team ends up being pass heavy, really trying to fix that passing offense from last year, Logan Thomas is a guy that can put it together this year, get the target share, and put up a great and productive season as a tight end. So, fantasy gurus out there, if you're looking for a tight end late, I suggest you get Logan Thomas. I think he can be that guy, and he's the guy you can get very late in your draft, past the 8th round all the way down, even later than the 10th round, I've seen him gone. So, Logan Thomas, be on the lookout for him and watch out for him once the season starts. All right, so let's wrap it up here. My number one team, I think, ready to take that next step moving forward as a franchise, has to be the LA Chargers. I mean, you see LT here behind me as an inspiration, always looking on. The LA Chargers are a team that built around Herbert to succeed. That's my headline of the LA Chargers off season. They're building around Justin Herbert to take that next step. And if Herbert takes that next step, the team will take that next step. And I said it again, and I'll say it again, and I'll say it again. The LA Chargers are in a position to make the playoffs this year. That's their next step. I think the LA Chargers can be a playoff team. I said they're going to be an 11-win team, I believe it was, double-digit wins, and making the wild card and challenging the Chiefs potentially in this division. I don't think they have a shot at winning it, but they're going to be right there behind them. They're going to be the team to watch out for when you're looking behind you, as the Chiefs always do in their division. They're going to turn around this year and notice that the Chargers are going to be right there in the thick of it with them. Starting to steal some divisional games. They start winning one or two games. Actually, one of the 2 games against the Chiefs. The Chargers are starting to make a lot of noise in terms of their franchise moving forward in that division in the AFC West. But last year, 7-9, missed the playoffs, and Justin Herbert's rookie season. Primarily, the same thing we'd said with the Carolina Panthers, a lot of late calls, bad decision making by the coaching staff. Same thing with the LA Chargers with Anthony Lynn. Terrible decisions late in games in the fourth quarters. They lost far too many games than they should have. But you look at when this team can put it all together. Justin Herbert's very first NFL start, where he wasn't even supposed to play that game, took the Chiefs to overtime and never got another game against Patrick Mahomes. They ended up beating the Chiefs in the last week of the season when Mahomes was, sitting out, getting his rest before, the 2-week bye they basically had the last week of the season in the first round bye, leading up to the playoffs. He never got a shot at that second game against Patrick Mahomes. So in his first game against Mahomes, took him to overtime. His first NFL start, again, a game he wasn't even supposed to play, took Mahomes to overtime. I'm excited to see those 2 games against the Kansas City Chiefs this year, against the LA Chargers. But I talked about this team is built around Justin Herbert to succeed. First and foremost, they got Anthony Lynn out of the house. He's gone. He needed to go, and thankfully, he's gone. So they brought in head coach Brandon Staley to lead their team now, who many have claimed to be the defensive Sean McVay, a guy who I'm very happy with. He's an analytical guy, smart guy, and a big defensive guy. And I love that hire. I talked about how I loved Robert Saleh. He was my second favorite hire. Brandon Staley is my favorite hire. He's my favorite hire this year's coaching cycle. And last year, Kevin Stefanski in his first year won Coach of the Year. I think Brandon Staley is the guy to watch out for to being a Coach of the Year candidate this year for the LA Chargers. If they can turn things around and make the playoffs, who has a better resume, I think, than Brandon Staley in his first year, especially if this defensive unit turns things around as well. Last year, their defense ranked 23rd in scoring, 9th against the pass, which was pretty great, but ended up being 10th in total defense. And offense, 9th in total offense, 6th in passing, and 18th in rushing. But dealt with some injuries rushing at running back wise, and a little bit of some inexperience that I think will all be improved this time around. So again, sorry, I got a little sidetracked there. Built around Herbert to succeed. Let's look at this roster and what they've improved on in terms of how they're going to help Justin Herbert succeed. Let's start with up front. Up front, they were already pretty decent last year on the offensive line um, with what they had going on. Brian Balaga, the big guy that they had on their offensive line, the big name. This year, adding in Corey Linsley, who was a first team All Pro center from the Green Bay Packers, now leading the charge up front and leading the way as the middle guy, the center for the LA Chargers. You add in Matt Filer as well from the Pittsburgh Steelers, another experienced veteran up front to help protect Justin Herbert. And then the draft, first round, their guy came to him, and he landed there. Rashawn Slater out of Northwestern, who I think might be the best lineman out of the entire draft. He's up there with Penny Sewell. Those again, I talked about the corners, 1A and 1B. Offensive tackle, 1A, 1B. Slater and Sewell are those guys of this year's draft. Slater's a 5-position guy when I scouted him. He's played all 5 positions in college, and bringing that versatility to the LA Chargers with the experience they already have, that's going to give them the depth they need. If injuries happen, they can rely on Slater to move around and fill those holes on their offensive line. And then they also added J.R. Cook, an experienced tight end, to fill the hole left by Hunter Henry, to give that security blanket back to Justin Herbert and that offense. And then added another guy in the wide receiver room late in the draft in Josh Palmer out of Tennessee, another guy who can help boost that wide receiver room that's already been pretty solid the last couple of years. Getting him, that guy in-house now, is going to help that team improve as well. So that's their offense. And keep in mind also, Austin Eckler, if he has a full healthy season as well, I'll get more into him also, but he's coming back fully healthy. Hopefully we'll have a fully healthy season at running back to avoid that injury issues they had last year and inconsistency and inexperience at running back. Hopefully that'll be improved with Austin Eckler being back and healthy this year. So on the defensive side of the ball, of course, we all know Joey Bosa. He's a leader of that defense. He is the star, pretty much of this team, is Joey Bosa at defensive end. But also keep in mind, the real star is coming back this year in Derwin James at safety. Again, another guy who I think could be a significant upgrade and a significant boost to the entire team if he has a full healthy season this year with the LA Chargers. Also with Brandon Staley. I think Brandon Staley, we saw him capitalize a lot in LA with Jalen Ramsey and with John Johnson at safety as well. And LaMarcus Joyner all had their best years under Brandon Staley in that defense. And I think this will be Derwin James' best year if he's fully healthy. Well, this will be his best year if he's fully healthy with Brandon Staley on that defense. And then at corner, they lost Casey Hayward, but keep in mind, with this number 9 ranked passing defense, they did lose Casey Hayward, but they still have Chris Harris Jr., who they brought in last year. Definitely did not draft him, but he has that Super Bowl experience as well and postseason experience that defense needs. And you're adding him with Asante Samuel Jr., who was one of my favorite corners in the draft. They got him, which was a steal in the second round, in my opinion, who's going to be alongside him to learn from and grow as that number 2 corner role. So this defense, a little bit of holes in between secondary and still a little bit of holes still up front. But at linebacker, Kenneth Murray's entering year 2 on that defense. And last year had a pretty solid year as well. Over 100 tackles, 5 tackles for a loss. And if they start getting some blitz packages together, getting him, he only had 1 sack last year. See what Brandon Staley dials up with Kenneth Murray, but he's never traditionally been that big sack king at linebacker. He's more of the pass coverage guy, and I think that's a good fit for him and exactly what they need going forward. So just some notes from training camp I have. The wide receiver room. It's really the only note I have for the LA Chargers going into this season. What is that going to look like? We all know Keenan Allen and Mike Williams are the 1 and 2. Those are the 2 guys. Mike Williams entering a contract year. He's going to want to have a big year. Keenan Allen arguably is a top 5, definitely top 10 potentially wide receiver in the NFL. So those 2 guys are locked in. And how are they going to fill out the rest of this roster at wide receiver and fill out their wide receiver room in terms of who's going to end up being the starters? Because last year, Tyron Johnson had a great year. KJ Hill, who they drafted, might end up being the odd man out. He only had 7 receptions last year, but did turn that into 73 yards. But played a lot and didn't have a lot of target shares and didn't have a lot of receptions. Only 7 receptions in his rookie season. He might be the odd man out, considering the fact they drafted Josh Palmer out of Tennessee. So my question for training camp is, how is this wide receiver room finally going to fall into place going down the leaderboard, or down the roster board, and where are these guys going to land? Because I really think potentially KJ Hill might be the odd man out in this offense, considering that the chemistry Tyron Johnson and Justin Herbert put together last year, and KJ Hill just not ever getting on the field, not ever getting opportunities, doesn't really show a good sign for him this year as we approach training camp. So that's my only question mark. Also, a question mark. I talk all this talk about Justin Herbert, but it's all on him. Is he going to make this second year jump, or is he going to take the second year slump? That's the question Herbert needs to make himself. And it's, their entire season relies on that question. Is Justin Herbert making that jump? The team makes the jump this season. So let's wrap it out here and talk about my watch out players. I have 2 of them who I already have talked about both. Derwin James back on defense, back in the secondary at safety with Brandon Staley now this year at head coach, who is a defensive mastermind. Derwin James needs to have a bounce back year, needs to have a statement comeback player of the year worthy season this year for this defense to take that next step. And for the offense to take the next step, they need Austin Ekeler at running back, healthy for the full season. That's critical. That has to happen for the LA Chargers. And if he is fully healthy for a full season, I said it before, Austin Ekeler is a guy who can be a 1,500 type of running back this year. 1,500 rushing yards and I think 1,500 receiving yards. Fully healthy, lead back. He has that type of potential. Another guy to very much target this dude, especially if you play PPR and fantasy. Target Austin Ekeler in the first round or even second round if he's there. Get Austin Ekeler locked in, because if he has a full healthy season, this could be his breakout year with this team. So that's all I have for you guys today, guys. Just want to get back to doing the midweek episodes of the Slaw Sports Show. So thank you all for joining me. I hope you enjoyed today's episode. Make sure to like, subscribe, and share the YouTube channel. Help us grow this brand. Check out the podcast as well. This one won't be on there, but all of our weekly Friday shows are always on the podcast as well. And of course, Friday from usually 10 to 11 p.m. We sometimes switch and change it. Always check out the Twitter at Slaw Sports Show to get the accurate times of our shows every week and what's to come in terms of that. But thank you for tuning in. Thank you for watching. And until next time, peace.